So our next panel is Be the Change. So profit is vital to businesses, and without the sustainability that generating a profit brings, no brilliant idea or life-changing intervention will survive. But what a business chooses to do with those profits is the key difference. At a time when energy and water profits are going through the roof, we ask what profit is for. Should we cap director and employee salary multiples? And we hear from some businesses doing some brilliant things with their profits and ask, how can we each make more impact, both individually and collectively? So our panellist today is Louisa Burman, who is also an impact consultant, Patrick Hurley from the Royal Society of Art, and Professor Paul Dewick. Is it Dewick or Dewick?
It's Dewick.
Dewick? Completely wrong, completely. Dewick, from Manchester Metropolitan University. So I want to start off with Louisa. So you are, come closer, Yeah, come closer, guys. Come closer.
We're all friends here.
We're all friends. So you are the founder of Liverpool Soup.
Yes, yeah.
Has anyone heard of Liverpool Soup? Can you tell our business family what Liverpool Soup is all about?
Yeah, you've got a good panel because Patrick ran Liverpool Soup from 2015 as well. Yeah. So Liverpool Soup is a micro-funding event. We run 4 events a year. People come along, they make a donation on the door, it's pay what you can afford, and every donation, regardless of the size, entitles you to a bowl of soup and a vote. We then listen to 4 local projects. They do a 4-minute pitch, and after each pitch, there's plenty of time for the audience to ask questions. And then we pause for soup and bread, where there's loads of deliberations that go on. We also make a real effort for all of the 4 projects to be really different, and that means that people in the audience get a really broad view of what the communities within the Liverpool City region need, what they want, what they're driving for. Everyone votes, and the project that wins the most votes gets given 100 quid. Oh no, they get given all the money on the door, and all the runners-up get 100 quid just to thank them for spending the evening telling them about the project.
And it can go up to like over £1,000 as well, isn't it?
Last event, over 1,800.
Amazing.
Yeah, we're really fortunate there's some people that want to help us grow our impact, so they put some money in the pot as well. So it's match funded up to 100 quid.
So I know a few winners.
Oh, fab.
I know a few winners, and, it's meant a lot to them winning. It really, sorry, go on.
Well, I was going to say, because a lot of the winners and even the pitches that we speak to, it's not actually the cash that adds the value, which kind of brings in the social value conversation. They really appreciate being given the platform and having people talk to them and almost validate their ideas. I'm not sure validation is the right word, because they're already valid enough to be able to make it to the stage, but that kind of added boost of confidence and support, I think, from the local community really counts.
And how, and talking about social impact, and how do you even start that? Because you just don't wake up one day and go, this is what I'm going to do. What was the main vision for looking at social impact and, and giving people, this cash injection that can actually change their business?
Yeah, I think I'm hesitating because I did sell my soul for quite a while in the corporate world, and Liverpool Soup was probably actually the turning point that got me thinking more specifically about what social value is and how that infiltrates or could infiltrate into the business world, and it certainly wasn't in the roles that I was in. And to kind of be clear, I guess, on what we mean when we're talking about social impact, I define that as being the change that you have on people and communities as a result of any actions that you've done. And so listening to people as they're pitching and listening to things the things that the pitchers took away, but also the audience took away from being at Liverpool Soup was really interesting and started me thinking more about the qualitative factors that contribute to impact and perhaps that we should be considering more in the decisions that we're making.
And in terms of the Royal Society of Arts, what does social impact mean to you guys?
Okay, so probably best described in terms of some examples.
Yeah.
So Royal Society of Arts is a 200-plus-year-old society, a charity, that takes the best of new innovations and applies them to social problems, sees if we can solve those social problems. One of the first social problems that we tried to solve was that little boys were getting stuck up chimneys back in the 1700s. And so we worked with people, we put this kind of prize money fund together to see if we can solve that problem. And the technological solution that we developed with partners, it was a pipe with a brush in the middle that would solve that problem and stop the little boys getting stuck up chimneys. Now, it's a bit of a wry smile when you say, well, obvious, but somebody still had to invent that and still apply it to the social problem of the day. And we take that ethos and we take that mindset and we apply it to the problems of the 2020s. So we've done that throughout our history. We're here at a business summit. We invented the concept of the business summit. We were behind the Great Exhibition in the 1850s. It was the first of these expos that then took flight. And so what we do, I think it's probably best not to get hung up on the theory or the abstract of what social impact is, because I think we all instinctively know what we mean when we say that we want to have impact that's got a social benefit rather than a profit motive. And I think it's best that we just get stuck in and we actually say, because we are people who want to have social impact, by virtue of that fact, the stuff that we do will indeed have that impact.
So funny enough, I was on another panel and we were discussing how when you say you're a social entrepreneur, it kind of gets knocked. So there's this notion that the government doesn't understand what being a social entrepreneur is. It's like, it's a nice to have. Yeah. You know, you just want to, it's quite airy-fairy kind of thing. So I think a lot of people are so stuck on this social impact because the measuring of it actually can either get you more funding or grants. So then you get really boiled down into showcasing that you are a socially trading organisation. So what I'm trying to say is, it's easy to say just, it's nice to get on with it, but then we keep on getting asked to report it.
Yeah, many years ago, going back a decade or more, I worked for an organisation which was a membership body for social enterprises in Liverpool. And every single event, the first question would be, well, how can we define a social enterprise? And after about the first dozen of these questions, the only answer that would suffice would be, well, you can't. If you think you're a social entrepreneur or you run a social enterprise, then you do, because you self-define in that way and you think, oh, actually, I am the sort of person that's got a social ethos at my heart. I'm running a business, but I'm running a business which reinvests its profits. I don't have shareholders, but trying to formalize that and codify it into set criteria, it was just too problematic. So we never did it, and obviously government has never done it, and nobody else has ever managed sufficiently to be able to say that's precisely what a socially traded organisation is. And I think really we just have to go on, firstly instinct, but also motivation, and essentially, you know a social traded organisation when you see one. You know social impact when you see it. And I think anything else that we start trying to get into greater definitions, you very, very quickly get into this labyrinth that you lose yourself in.
Paul, can I come to you? So I'm really interested in, is a Future Earth's Knowledge. So it's a Future Earth's Knowledge Action Network. Okay. Working group on the circular economy. That's big. Can you elaborate on that for us?
Yes, okay. So Future Earth is a global network of academics, scientists, innovators, policymakers, NGOs. We are there to help support better, more sustainable future through different ways. So we have different working groups. So in fact, there are different knowledge action networks. One of those is around systems of sustainable consumption and production. And then within that, there are different working groups. So and they all look at the challenges of sustainability through different lenses. Okay. So some will look at it through a political economy lens, some will look at it through the lens of how do we communicate, how do we get our messages across. Some of it is about more on the consumption side and practices, and we have one group that looks at circular economy, and it's not there to advocate for the circular economy. We are quite critical, actually. You know, we tend to work at the on the fringes, so looking at what circular economy has got to do with, for instance, biodiversity, which is very sort of poorly understood, what relationship there is between circular economy and the informal economy. So circular economy is quite a northern Western concept about shifting from that linear system of create, make, use, waste to something which is more circular in terms of regenerating natural capital, in terms of narrowing the input, so being more efficient, in terms of slowing down, so looking at how we can reuse products and how we can close systems, so how we can have looping back into the production system again. So it's on the face of it, it's quite a simple concept, though we unpack it, and then what we do in our group is tend to look at the fringes and to see and to progress that state of knowledge further. And we try to engage practitioners as well. So we're less good at doing this, to be honest. Okay, so we're quite good at knowledge creation, sort of shifting forward our understanding, less good at engaging with practitioners and moving forward the action side of it. So we are a knowledge action network, and we are conscious, we are self-critical of ourselves that we've done far more on the knowledge side than we have on the action side. So recently we had a conference back in November, so that was wholly online, so it was free to go to, and that was one of our real sort of concerted efforts to engage with non-academic stakeholders. So on my panel, for instance, we ran a session on biodiversity and the circular economy, and we brought in speakers from UNCTAD, this is the UN. We brought in speakers from an innovation fund, an environment agency, but actually still they're quite close to academics, really. Yes. What we wanted to do was to bring in, we had I'd spoken about bringing in a small community business in South Africa, which was about resources management, but was also into gender equality and youth empowerment, and we invited them to come along and speak to us. And sometimes organisations like that do need some. They sort of lack the confidence. They feel that this is not the arena where they feel comfortable. Yeah. And so there was lots of discussions early on. We had another one from South America, which was looking at circular networks in the Amazon rainforest. And unfortunately, those two speakers dropped out at the last minute.
You know what? Sometimes I think it's language. Language and finding a way of creating a space, not a space, how can I describe it? You sometimes find with a lot of organisations, when they come to the UK or even being invited by UK panels, they will say that there's a lack of confidence when it comes to language and feel like they don't feel like they're part of it. Yeah. And it's a shame because there's so much to offer.
Absolutely.
From their point of view, and it's finding ways of inviting them. I was just going to touch on, we're talking about Be the Change, and we've always talked about, people over profit, and how best to do that. The gap right now is just getting wider and wider, and it doesn't seem to be stopping anytime soon. So how can organisations, put people over profit? What are those changes that they can make to kind of build a stronger society or support a stronger society? Hope that's not too big of a question.
It's a massive question. How long have we got?
An hour, only joking.
Okay, so I think when we talk about a strong society, what first comes to mind for me is basically what we want is we want people to be healthy, physically and mentally, and we want to have infrastructure and systems in place that can support that for generation after generation, so for people to thrive generation after generation. And I think one of the struggles at the moment is increases in inequality. For example, average FTSE 100 CEO at the moment gets paid 3.4 million. So that's 103 times the average UK worker in the UK if they're working full time. So to put that into context, by the 5th of January this year, the average FTSE 100 CEO will have earned as much as a UK worker will have done in the entire year. And that's a really difficult mindset to shift away from, that everything is so heavily incentivised. One example that absolutely blows my brain is that the Sports Direct CEO has got an incentive at the moment. So if he manages to get their share price to £15 by 2025, he's going to get £100 million, which is 100 times his annual salary of £1 million. And for me, that is incentivising completely the wrong thing. It's a difficult conversation to have because we need money. No one's suggesting that for purpose-led businesses don't make a profit and they're not able to sustain in today's economy, but it's trying to shift the focus, I think, and trying to challenge those incentives that are just in the wrong place. So I think you touched on before, kind of like the low to high pay ratio. If people with businesses can look at that and consider it in line with, just scrutinise it in line with your own values. There's no need to kind of put a specific scale of what's good and what's bad, because it'll depend on what the lowest paid person in your business is earning. Looking at that and also looking into profit shares, as well as things like ownership, shared ownership where possible, having bonuses for people across the organisation regardless of whether they're executives or not, I think is really, really, really valuable. And I'm keep rambling. Do you want me to stop? Or?
I was going to say, Patrick.
Yeah, so I can come in on this. You mentioned the word incentives quite a lot there, Louisa. And people react to incentives and businesses react to incentives.
Yeah.
And currently what we're doing is we are not disincentivising antisocial behaviour within businesses. Okay. I'll talk about the concept of limited liability for companies. Okay, so limited liability was not handed down from heaven on tablets of stone for there forevermore. It was brought in by an Act of Parliament legislation that wanted to incentivise risk-taking so that if companies took risks, the company owners wouldn't lose their house and they wouldn't lose the shirt off their back. We can do likewise and say, well, your limited liability for your company is contingent upon social outcomes. So if, for instance, there's a pay ratio which is excessive, and I don't want to put a figure on this, but I would suggest £100 million in a year is a little bit excessive. The social contract that underpins the limited liability concept should not be looking to incentivise that sort of pay ratio. And I would have no problem personally in saying that if there's a £100 million being given to a CEO at the top of the tree and £12 an hour being given to someone at the bottom of the tree, then we should have a conversation about whether limited liability should apply to your business or not, and whether there are new Companies Act and a new Business Act should be brought in that reflects what society's priorities are now, rather than what society's priorities were back in the 1840s when Companies Acts were first being created. So we need to incentivise that behaviour and crucially stop disincentivising, if I've got this right, bad behaviour by companies. So.
And it's interesting as you both talk. Before I move on, did you want to add to that, Paul?
Well, only to, I think we all here feel uncomfortable when we see these massive salaries, and there are some, been some very high-profile CEOs in the past few weeks drawing enormous salary and bonuses in operating in industries with questionable sort of moral and ethical license to operate. So I think we can all feel uncomfortable about that. when I teach here at the business school, and we quite a lot of the people who we teach are either on senior leaders or apprentices, so they are already in business, and they are open-minded. They are optimistic. They're willing to be creative in how they think about how they can make a difference. They get this idea. This bold sort of statement that you have outside about, what is our business doing to create a better world, or something like that. That's the how can we make a difference? And there's no silver bullet to it. Every organisation is different, but starting that conversation, getting them to think about it, getting them to, whether it's the leadership at the top or whether it's empowering leadership elsewhere in the organisation, looking for ways that you can contribute to a healthier, stronger society. And some of that is around well-being, and some of that is very connected to environmental impacts as well. If we continue to trash the environment, then we are not going to be a healthy society as a result of doing that. So those ideas about how can we reduce our material use, how can we reduce our energy, how can we invest in regeneration projects, rather like what we saw with JK's metaphor there of the tree and wildlife. These are all possible avenues, but they can be used in different ways by organisations if they start that conversation.
I want to come back to you. Oh goodness, Patrick. So a lot of small businesses or social enterprises, they start off with, they are the change, they see a problem in society and they want to solve it. And a lot of social entrepreneurs, even the notion of talking about money makes them cringe, knowing that they have to be sustainable. So how can I put it? So I know lots of social entrepreneurs who, if you talked about the big money and the big turnovers, it's like, no, that's not what we're in business for. So how do you then support these social entrepreneurs or social businesses, or like in terms of advice, to be able to say it's not bad, because if you can put that money back into society, like...
Yeah, it's difficult because on the one hand, you've got the imperative to pay yourself running a small business. If you don't pay yourself, you don't have a small business. You've just got a nice project that you've decided to do. But on the other hand, if all you're doing is paying yourself, then you're not actually having that social impact. There's no silver bullet here. You just have to, balance those things in the round and say, well, okay, 1 year, we're not going to have as great a social impact as we would in previous years. Or maybe look to see if you can partner up with other organisations or other individuals within your network. One of the projects that I'm working on at the Royal Society of Arts is to see whether or not we can reduce the startup costs for socially minded projects across the north of England. And one of the ways that we're looking to do that is to see whether or not people can share or would be willing to share their business plans and their financial forecasts on something approaching a kind of a Creative Commons or an open source license, so that anybody who's started a business and anybody that's going through or gone through that process will know, you can stay up till 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning, writing your goddamn business plan over and over again, and the figures don't add up, and you can't. If it's already been done 80 miles away, and the project that you're running is very similar to the project that somebody else is running on the other side of the country, I want to see whether we can reduce the costs and see if that knowledge can be shared, and not just like formalised knowledge in terms of documents, but also that bit of mentoring support as well. And hopefully that can reduce the chances of people not succeeding in their social endeavours.
I think we've made a little bit of a start. I always say this to people, we're quite lucky in Liverpool, because I think we've got, I think there's Erica here from Kindred, the library's Central Library in Liverpool has got their business department, we've got BIPC, but I think across when you look at England, I think Liverpool is doing a lot better than most in that kind of sharing assets and information.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think Liverpool has got a lot of grit, for sure. And I think when it comes to considering financials, reporting, thinking about integrated reporting, so thinking about reporting financials against social and environmental considerations is a good way to balance that. One of the boards I sit on is for Sefton Park Palmhouse. And it's quite unique because we're a charity, but we could make a shed ton of money by just renting out for weddings. It's a gorgeous, like, Victorian greenhouse in a massive park in South Liverpool. We were in OK magazine the other week because we had a JLS wedding there. Like, you could absolutely rake in the money by doing that, but it's important not to get too distracted by that, not to chase that, okay, we can get that big bit, and then we can increase people's salaries, and we can invest in training, and we could invest in community groups. But thinking, well, what are we foregoing by doing that? Because we might have that cash to make investments in things that would sit under the umbrella of social value, but what about the benefit to the local community if we just have it open? If people can just come and grab a coffee and they can sit in there and they're undisturbed under the palms for 3 hours. So it's a really tricky, it's really interesting kind of like board discussion when you start putting these things next to each other, because then you get in the bracket of like, how do you define social value, and then which social value has got a higher rating than another. I personally don't advocate for social value being given a pound value, because I think that's a really, really tricky thing. You cannot have it as a black and white. It's more than the financial, therefore we're going to do it, or it's less, so we're not. I do think it should always be a discussion to kind of round it out.
Thank you. I was just going to add that it's great to hear about everything going on in Liverpool. I was going to make a plug for Manchester. As a Manchester City fan here, I feel even more reason to sort of rise up against Liverpool. Not against Liverpool, but...
You said what you said, Paul.
The rising tide is lifting us all.
This isn't football, but we can't talk about football.
I was just reflecting on my time at. I spent nearly 20 years at the University of Manchester, and toward the end of that time, was involved in a spin-out, which was a community interest company spin-out. And we found out we were lucky in the sense that we were in the university, so we could work with the intellectual property people. We had legal advice, but there were lots of incubators that we could go to. In Manchester, we went and sat in one at Alderley Park. We were working on a digital health technology, so there were others provided by Greater Manchester Academic Health Network, which became Health Innovation Manchester. So there is that support out there. But we found that, because we were academics and we wanted to do this for the social good. We wanted to make a difference in the community. It was written into the articles of the company, but we still had to get the business funded. So we still had to have those cash flow forecasts. We still had to stand up in front of investors and make that business case to be able to do the good that we wanted to do.
And it's interesting because I remember when you hear, because the last panel we were talking about B Corp as well, and how strenuous it can be to get that B Corp certification and that journey, especially if you're a small business. And it's interesting because, fast food chains like McDonald's and even like Pepsi and Coca-Cola can be they've got charity, I think they've got charity status, and Rolex is a charity as well. Can you imagine? Did you know that Rolex was a charity? Did anyone else? Well, imagine. So I was flabbergasted. But they've got the money to be able to show that they're socially trading, or they've got social impact.
I wonder if is it like a foundation that they've got.
So they've got a foundation.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. I was going to. Yeah, and I think it kind of. Well, we won't go into a tangent of tax options, but yeah, I think when you have charity status, you need to be able to define your charitable objective, and under charities law, everything that the charity does has to be in line with that objective. So I would be incredibly surprised if the whole organisation has.
Oh no, it is. So the way it works out.
It's tangent.
Yeah, I had to do some digging, because I just could not believe it. Because it's based in Switzerland. So the whole tax thing was it's unbelievable.
If you can pay for a good accountant.
Well, this is it. And we haven't got that kind of money, do we? Do we, guys? To pay for a good...
But would we want to?
Well, I wouldn't at all. No.
Good, quick
answer.
Who wants
a mansion and no, I'm joking. but it is, isn't it? I think that's the hard part. It's not a hard part. I think I think sometimes you know you want to do good.
Yeah.
And we were saying at the beginning, it's not about, you want to thrive, but in the right way. And I think someone else said this, instead of pushing SMEs to show their social impact, and that they're socially trading, or they're subcontracting a socially in a environmentally friendly way, and all these type of things, what we should be doing is making sure that the government understands that they need to put those layers in, that we're not having to prove it. So it should be part of our DNA in the first place.
Yeah, I agree, and I think the government could certainly do a huge amount more to incentivise, as Patrick was saying before. I think it's a really healthy conversation to have around what is social value and what we see as being social value, because there's a number of SMEs that I speak to, and they go, what is social impact? I don't get it. And just by going, well, are you paying the real living wage? Are you investing in people's development? Do you have an understanding of what the wants and the needs of the people you're serving are before you make decisions? How are you co-designing your approaches and your strategies to meet those needs? Has to be a conscious thing. I think for smaller organisations, and certainly kind of like definitely at startup stage where there's a lot of interaction, so like B2C, I just encourage people to keep a book, and when you get really positive feedback, jot down what the key points are and start to get an understanding of what the qualitative outcomes are that you're achieving. Are you building people's confidence? Are they enjoying the networks they're getting? Those types of things. You don't need to turn it into a 1 FTE type position. It's trying to incorporate it and trying to know what's important to you. And it could just be the one thing that you want to be able to pay everyone the real living wage, because that's all you can kind of like handle at the moment. But that's the start.
I know, so interesting. A friend of mine actually asked me a question, because I was saying, I'm looking at recruitment, and he asked me, what are they going to get from you? And I was like, oh God. And that's a really good question.
What impact are you going to have?
Exactly, because we are in this notion of, if we're hiring someone, we're helping them out. They're getting a job, and and we're paying them. And he said, no, but apart from their wages, what are they going to get from working with Gunnar and Adamu? And then I thought, oh God, I've never really thought about it. And I think as for companies, that's maybe a question we should be asking. It's not about some being lucky to work with us. It's what we should be lucky that we're getting these talented people who could probably take our businesses to the next level. But what are we giving them? Apart from that financial gain, what are we giving them?
Yeah, I think it's important to remember, or for me to state, that social impact is not always just synonymous with ethical behaviour, not just always synonymous with a self-image of being a good person. And the example I'll give is that Tesco feeds more people in poverty than the Trussell Trust food banks do.
Wow.
If you ask for an example of which does the most ethical good in the world, well, you'd say, well, the food banks do much more ethical good than this rapacious capitalist supermarket chain. Well, actually, more people in poverty rely on Tesco for their meals than food banks. And if we remove Tesco from the ecosystem of business, we're doing more harm than we would do if we close down every food bank. So I'm not suggesting we close down food banks, obviously, but so if you're defining purely by what your impact is, then I think you're being more inclusive in what social impact can be than perhaps you might think at first glance. Another thing you mentioned about Rolex there, if we think of private healthcare, and a big private healthcare company is Bupa. So Bupa stands for British United Provident Association, and it's a not-for-profit social enterprise. But it doesn't have the image of being a not-for-profit social enterprise. It's got an image as though it's a private company that's taking your money and doesn't have any shareholders. But it just doesn't come across as being the thing that we want it to have, even though it's got social impact.
And it's interesting because, sorry,
No, go on.
one of the ladies was talking about, ethical, like our ethical exclusion and incubators, and what we class. We then start putting our own benchmarks about what we think is ethical, which then, alienates other companies that are doing good, because they're not what we class as ethical.
100%, and I think there's a lot to there's a lot of work to be done to be thinking when impact reporting on short-term impact versus long-term impact. So I think food banks and feeding people in poverty is a really good example that for Tesco's, it's actually really great that people go to their shop, buy more food, and then put it in the trolley at the front and give it to people that need it. But what are they doing to challenge a system where we've got people living in poverty in the first place? And I think that's where we perhaps need to think and maybe criticise more openly where people might be contributing, might be making an impact at a surface level, the X amount of meals donated, whatever. Yeah. But what is the systems change that we're trying to really kind of promote and support in the actions that we're taking?
Oh, we've run out of time. Can we ask one question? Like I'm asking me, Mum, please, Fiona, one question. Does anyone have a question? This is like the make or break question. Just one question. Okay. We've got the lady with the glasses.
Hi, Davina. My question is it down to business, and how much, to your point, Louisa, should we be challenging up? Are we almost stuck in this saviour complex where some of these issues don't exist in other countries? And we're talking about homelessness, food poverty. These are systemic issues which, shouldn't be down to social impact companies to solve. The government and tax reform and all of that needs to be taken into account. So perhaps some input from you on how those things might be contributing as well.
Yeah, I don't think it is solely down to business. I don't think it should be down to business. But I think it's the responsibility of everybody that lives in the society that we live in now to do what they can. And I think I've really found hopeful over the past maybe 5 years that uplift in businesses thinking about how they can lead the way. Because I do think there needs to be a real swell of examples and case studies so people can stop saying, well, it just doesn't make sense, we can't make money that way. So I completely agree. I think it would be lovely if the government was driving more of this with a strong hand. But I think with the lack of that, business is not a bad force, really, in its entirety to make a real impact.
Yeah, very briefly, government needs to raise its game, and I am hopeful that will happen within the next year or two.
Only to add, we can't rely on business alone. History shows us that we can't do that. You look at how we as a society have responded to sustainability challenges of the past. It's required collaboration between stakeholders. It is about industry, working with government, working with society, and a big role of science and communication of science and communication of these problems to the public. So business have got to do their fair share. I suppose that's the way of thinking about it. We're not dropping the gauntlet to be picked up solely by business, but we just think that they have a contribution to make, and they should think about how they can make that fair share.
Thank you very much to Louisa. Oh, actions. What action would you like our business family to take away?
I was thinking about this and I just rested on something that was actually quite simple, and for me it's smiling at strangers. Like, really, where you have the opportunity to speak to somebody that you've not spoken to before, trying to understand what makes them tick, trying to help them understand your point of view, because we can't change systems unless we have those networks and we connect with people that aren't like us. We try and get out of our echo chambers.
Advocate for a new Companies Act that will take account of society's priorities right now. Write to your MP.
I would empower people within your organisations, encourage them to brainstorm, to think laterally, to be creative. How can things be different? And they might be minor changes, but then if they're replicated across the organisation, across organisations, then it can have a big difference. So I would call for creativity and empowerment.
Thank you very much. Big round of applause. Thank you.